Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who just stepped into my shop and
Wow, that was Tim Longo dying from those darn assassins.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well done. That was took a little prep. Is that actually a sample from the game?
No, it is not. I just looked up a quick. I was not motivated enough. I could always go at it in post. So who knows? Who knows what the audience will actually hear? Spoilers. They will hear what we just did.
That's hilarious. Yeah, man, that moment.
That is a moment we'll have to talk about later in the episode when we talk about that level, because that level has a lot of interesting things about it. We, of course, are talking about Thief. We're in our second episode discussing the game and its many wonders. There are many. We're not hurting for topics because this is a very rich. This is a very rich game. A lot of material here. You had said maybe we would start off with story stuff. I think that's fine. I think that but I'd like you to kind of take point there and tell me where you want to take that, because there's so many different things going on in this story, in a way that's pretty organic. So, yeah, lead us in.
Yeah, and I think I put it out there as a topic mainly just to start the conversation, because we're not far enough in to really uncover, particular like revelations per se, other than Constantine, which you meet in a interesting and cool way, I think, in this session that we played. But the main thing I want to bring up story for is just as the world building is starting to begin. The game starts off, and you're in our last session, you're pretty much just I don't mean this in kind of a mundane way, but you're sort of day in the life of a thief. It's like you're doing these specific jobs, and you're learning about your fence, and then you got to go help find him in the prison and all this kind of stuff. So it's stuff that kind of starts, you start off, though we didn't know it at the time because we had never played a game based on a thief before, but you start off in a way that you kind of would expect, and it's sort of like these are objectives that thieves would have, and kind of backstory that it would have. But then in this session,
kind of loosely connected as well. You don't stumble onto the big story in the first mission. You are just kind of establishing a baseline of what this guy's life is like.
Yeah, but then, in the first session that we played last time in, I guess it was the prison. Yeah, in the prison, they start introducing this faction, the Hammer. That's what they're called, right? Just the Hammer.
Yeah, the Hammerites. Yeah,
the Hammerites. Yeah, and they start, I think, ideally, I would assume, in a pretty intentional way. They start peppering in these sort of groups that. And then, in addition to those groups, especially in the cinematic kind of interludes between the levels, they start having this prose / poetry, happening. What's the word I'm looking for?
Like biblical verses or something.
Yeah, verses that are coming from some. Two different sort of sources. One that seems fairly religious and probably, often is quoted from some sort of sources that are kind of probably in the Hammerites kind of world. And then this other source, there might be a third one I'm forgetting, but then this other source that's sort of like this trickster, almost like, old Celtic kind of like, old school pagan kind of scripture or something, right? And so you have this weird contrast starting to be introduced, and then they start threading some of that backstory into the levels themselves, because you're starting to meet these weird creatures. And then in the Constantine level, you get to, his garden, and there's sort of weird like experiments going on, and there's some illusions of stuff. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is it's starting to get weird now, right? In this last session we played, the story, you think you're going in this sort of one direction when the beginning of the game, when it starts, and And then the thing that I kind of always forget about this game, to be honest, is the title, Thief: The Dark Project. And you're kind of like, what's the Dark Project? What does that mean? You know, and then you start getting, and then it starts getting a little more metaphysical. You know, when you get the sword, there's this sort of magical sword and it's hovering there. So they just start weaving in some of this sort of metaphysical and fantasy stuff in amongst this world building of these weird factions that really, I remember back when I first played it, caught me off guard because it kind of sneaks up on you, you know, and you start understanding who the main players are going to be, it seems like. In you know, and maybe how you're sort of the mercenary, sort of like a neutral agent that has to maybe not necessarily pick a side, but you know, you end up, you know, potentially working for Constantine and all this stuff. So
right, or you're even like a catalyst for some uneasy balance finally being tipped in one direction or the other. To sort of take the same chemical sort of thinking is that you don't know how you're going to fit into all of this, and what's pulling you in is, of course, your greed and your need to pay your rent and things like that. You know, this is just what you do, and you happen to stumble into something much larger, right? And a pretty common trope in games, but the way this one is done is pretty unusual. I think I don't remember a lot like this at the time. And especially the sort of feeling like you're this day-to-day person. And I mean, it happens some in RPGs, I guess, but usually it's just long enough to establish the town that the big villain's going to come and destroy everybody in, so that you have some reason to really hate him, right? I mean, there's like the tropes are really big and broad usually in the RPGs if they set the history of the character in any way. So,
well, and as a thief, you really, at least up to this point, I don't think, I'm probably forgetting something, but at this point in time, you're not really like, you haven't been double crossed, or there's no revenge happening or whatever. You're still just doing kind of what you do, and then kind of being intertwined in the stuff going on, when really the objectives tend to be just go steal this thing. And little do you know that the thing you're stealing has some sort of other thing going on, let alone there's sort of the whole steampunk background. And I guess for me, long story short, is you know, this could have very easily been just a fantasy game about, you know, a traditional D&D sort of style fantasy game about a thief. And they definitely went places. And to your point about sort of the very different approach to telling all of this stuff to the player, especially the interlude cutscenes. I keep calling them interludes because they're almost so unique that it's hard to call them a cutscene. Right. Because they're very, you know, they're narrated so often. The style, you know, the style of them was very uncommon at the time, and felt very creative and different, though obviously it also probably helped them from a production standpoint too, to not have to do like fully 3D rendered ones like we talked about with Tomb Raider. So it was very clever and really worked well. But, you know, as a spoiler for criticism that I will probably have by the end of this series that we're doing, to be honest, my memory at least is by the time I'm done with the game, I feel like I would have rather that they stayed closer to the more grounded thief experience, if you know what I mean. When it starts getting crazier and crazier, and you're, you know, especially toward the end, which we have this conversation with many games in this, you know, this era, right? We've had this conversation a few times about how to end a game at this time, and this weird. So anyway, I won't spoil anyone who hasn't played the rest of the levels, but that'll come up again. But I kind of wanted to just set the stage for these major players coming into it, and this interesting sort of religion versus paganism, you know, motif, which, like you said, is an additional trope, and then this great character that is sort of that neutral party that gets mixed up in all of it, which it definitely, I remember it catching me off guard back in the day.
Yeah, I agree with you how it definitely gets strange, and we'll talk about the sword level here towards the end, because I think that's your first hint that, oh, this is going to go some really strange places. and when we talk about that, we'll also talk about some things like that have happened in more modern games, because there's a clear lineage there to a more recent title. But yeah, I also really like that sort of feel of I'm just a workaday thief, just trying to do my job. But I hesitate to think that was something that they could have carried all the way through with the goals that they had. I think that would have been hard to do. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's hard to say. I mean, so, I think often you don't. One of the things I worry about with story on these sorts of things is I don't know if it's hard to know what the players are going to want from that story. And I think it's unusual to want the straight up thief story, to be honest. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it could be definitely a personal preference thing. I definitely admit to that. I think there's sort of that, I don't want to necessarily just blame it on the 90s, but I feel like that era was very much about, I don't want to say like tricking or fooling the audience, but I don't think it was just in games either. There was just this sense that you wanted to kind of like surprise the audience with the unexpected in kind of weird ways. I'm trying to think of a non-game example, but it's, again, we talked about System Shock 2. What was the recent one? We talked about this with Tomb Raider as well, right? With the weirdness where that goes. I just think.
So you're thinking of like something like The Usual Suspects?
Well, so Usual Suspects, I think, is a
twist, right? I mean,
that's a good example of what I'm talking about. What I would prefer, right? That is a
okay.
sort of a. I don't want to like. I actually like using the word mundane, but I think people take it in a negative connotation when you usually use it. But I mean it in a positive way. I think Usual Suspects is a great example of a mundane twist that is just knocks you over. You know what I mean? You're just like, because it's really just about a scene that's taking place in a police station largely, and then it unravels by the end. You're like, what just happened? I guess statute of limitations is up for that. So yeah. And so that there wasn't like this weird, I never saw this coming kind of revelation. It was more of you piece it together and you're like, oh, I could have seen this coming potentially, and
I in fact did see that coming. So
okay, well, yeah, there you go. And so maybe for you it didn't work. In that case,
it worked, but it was more of a clockwork and appreciating.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So maybe still a positive, but just different than for myself and such. But I guess my point here is like I'm playing a thief game, and what I probably couldn't have guessed or seen coming is the supernatural weird stuff that starts happening. That it was kind of neat to experience, but then you're sort of like, wait, what kind of game is this? Or what kind of story is this? And for me personally, just kind of as a consumer of any media, maybe it's just getting old or whatever, but I tend to I feel like, I don't want to call it a crutch, but I feel like it's when you don't rely on the sort of out of left field weirdness as the surprise, I feel like I'm more impressed when it is something like a Usual Suspects where it's sort of like, you know what I mean? Or Memento or something like that. Where it seems clever, and I still also didn't see it coming, even though it's kind of a mundane answer. I don't know if that makes sense, but it felt like a crutch, kind of.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think at that time in games, it would have been difficult to sell a fantasy game that didn't have some magic and weirdness.
Yeah, maybe.
And
I think that was its
on the other hand, I also feel like this is a game that is going in so many directions with its world building anyway, that it's kind of a weird, like it's this sort of steampunky thing. It's already just in the first few levels, it's already very strange and different from most fantasy settings you've had. Oh, okay, well we have, gadgets and some of them are quite, mechanical gadgets. And of course that's, extended into Thief 2. When he gets an eye, like a mechanical lens or something in his face, and you've got them just all kinds of gears, and I mean that's really the background of the thing. You're like, what is this about? It doesn't not really your expectation, I think. And I wonder if maybe the sort of magic end of things and the sort of weirdness is to bring it back to that, to be to sort of swing the pendulum the other way from the sort of mechanistic world back to this sort of
contrast to that,
right?
Yeah.
Natural,
that's fair.
Natural religious world. I mean, I don't really know. It's hard to think about it in that way because it never really bothered me, but I can certainly see that it's like a nice contrast. Maybe it's hard to say.
I think for me, it just to your point about like the additional sort of science fiction aspects of it, whether when it comes to steampunk or whatever, I feel like there was plenty going on without it. Like I think they could have. I would have liked to have had them develop even just the city more, because it seems like a really interesting location and a lot going on and a lot of different things. And I kind of wanted more of that. So another example of a game we played, a series we played that I'll use, that's a sort of an interesting modern example. And I'm trying to assess my own personal tastes, by the way, as we're talking about this, because I'm like, why did I always, this bug me? I think it's more now than ever, is Hitman. And we talked a little bit about, I think, in the Hitman 2 series, but Hitman 1 starts in a very interesting way. And then for the first few games, definitely they lean in this weird canon and backstory about Agent 47 and clones and all this sort of like science fiction kind of stuff going on. That's really this weird backstory that I just thought was always unnecessary and kind of got in the way of just being the Hitman. And in the most recent one, that they kind of the semi reboot, they have a little bit of that backstory, but largely it's just focused on the fantasy of being that Hitman, and all the design choices seem to revolve around that. And so they do have a little bit of that sort of lore, if you will. But I feel like the game is much stronger than a lot of the previous ones for that reason. And Blood Money specifically also took most of that out. I think when they got out of their way they got out of their own way when it comes to that sort of like, I don't know, their lore book or their internal fiction. It felt like it started to actually, its identity was clearer to me and felt better. So anyway, personal.
Yeah, I mean, looking at another modern example, I think of like Assassin's Creed and having that first game, and then obviously really the whole series after that. I don't know. I haven't played the last few iterations, but I will eventually. I love those games. But having that framing story where it's a person from the future whose genetics are being untapped, and there's like these golden apple things and gods who are maybe aliens, and there's like this huge amount of stuff around it, when I'm kind of fine going back and just being the dude from the Crusades. Like that's all I really needed. I think it solves some problems for them. And I mean, years ago, I blogged about that. Like it does some good things for them of like, when you die, that's just you desyncing. And it's like, so there are sort of like game stuff that it kind of explains away. But I don't think that was really necessary.
I don't think so either. I think it's a great example of what I'm talking about, because I felt like what small amount of the Assassin's Creed series, to be honest, that I've played, it got in the way for me, and I felt like it kind of was overthinking things and kind of added in all the stuff. And I can't think of anyone, even listening to sort of like other podcasts and people that non-friends as well as friends, I can't think of anyone who really they play the Assassin's Creed games for all of that stuff.
Right.
Specifically,
I think it's always more like, wow, what are they going to do with this wacky stuff now? Here we are. Oh, in the fourth one, now we're basically at a company like Ubisoft, and you're a QA person in the modern levels. And you're like, what is going on? And I feel like it's just constantly curious, like, how are they going to tie that weird stuff in? They basically have two parallel tracks now that they sort of have to maintain, which seems unnecessary. Yeah. So
it feels overwrought and kind of Baroque or something, just like over-designed. And again, I always like to be a little self-reflective on this, because I definitely do the same thing sometimes and get caught up in it. So, especially with some of the universes I've worked in, but I think there's a constant self-assessment of that, at least for myself too, and challenging the team to make sure that we're, focusing on the right things, basically what's important, not what we think is important. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting, intriguing, kind of identity. What is the identity of the game, or the story, and not letting it stray too much from that. The other thing I'll add in from kind of a development standpoint, that even is my memory being a developer at this time, is, these games were we've talked about this before, but it was very sort of like smaller teams, largely one level designer would own each level, or probably multiple levels in this case. And there was a loose sort of like connection point between them, but a lot of times it was just like, what are people coming up with, and we'll kind of loosely string this together and have some themes and stuff. And there were scripts probably, and they thought through the, kind of the beginning, middle, and end of it generally, but it was a little bit more Wild West when it comes to like that, really crafted moment by moment, the whole time,
Right.
There's a lot more freedom.
You can hear that when we talk to Dario Casali about Half-Life, that they literally kind of stitched that together from what they had at a certain point. And so that's a good callback to that, which is the same year, right? I mean, it's
good point. It was just how things were done. I mean,
exactly. It was more driven by individual passions on the teams, because the teams were smaller. More of you was seen.
Talked about it with Dark Forces as well.
For sure.
Sort of like a similar thing. And thinking about indie at the time, that we, I guess, let's see, I would have been making indie at this time.
Yeah, you were finishing it around now. Yeah.
And that was, that was a little bit unique in that it was kind of a combo, because Hal Barwood was, he had more of a unified vision. But there definitely was, we were in particular sections, we were kind of just doing our own thing and loosely putting it together. So yeah. Interesting time. So anyway, sorry, that actually was long.
That was a lot. Let's turn from that, sort of funny story stuff and go directly to the mechanics, because there are, there's the mechanics you're probably seeing more of because you're fighting more than I am, but there's also some new mechanics that have come in at this point in the game, which I think extend the fantasy. So let's start with the sword, and then we'll go to the others that were added in, because the sword was there before. I mean, we just didn't talk about it a ton, more just kind of obliquely. You've been more of a sword swinger, I guess, in this playthrough.
I think more of than I've ever done before, though it's not, obviously I'm not, that's not my primary way, because you can't play the game that way, to be honest. It's just pretty much impossible, I think. Not impossible, but I think the thing, because of my two previous 2.5 whatever playthroughs in the far past, generally, or probably how you're playing or whatever, pretty stealthy and no kill run throughs. This was what's your term that you created that we like? What was the
knucklehead stealth?
The knucklehead. I'm playing like very knucklehead stealth, so it's like I'm just kind of come as I may, and unless I get myself in hot water, I'm not reloading too much, trying to. And so I end up sword fighting way more than I ever have. And so I'm able to actually fool around with it a little bit more and see what makes it tick. And I guess the really quick points that I want to make there, because it's not really too elaborate per se, but they have a block. And at least my perception of it is, and I wanted to kind of ask your thoughts on this from a technical perspective. My perception of it is that it is very collision based, because when the swords are clashing, they are definitely there clashing. And when they miss, and when I'm hitting them in the body and they're hitting me in the body, it seems very specific. And, I feel like in this era that wasn't very common to be very location based and very collision based. So maybe just perception, but it sure feels like because when you block, and there's different, as they teach you in the training mission, you can do a longer overhead. You can swipe left and right, and depending on what they're doing, there is a bit of a sword dance going on there where you definitely do want to choose whether you're going to swing on the left side or the right side based on what they're doing, and then you need to time your block. So it's not like a die by the sword or some sort, like we talked about. It's not like a full simulation of like sword combat in a fighting game way, but there is more going on there than I thought.
Yeah, it's not. I wouldn't say it's significantly advanced over Ultima Underworld, at least in the direct mechanics. The models obviously are more complicated, and they're 3D, right, instead of just the sprites. So they are probably doing some sort of knowing on which side the sword is, or knowing where the sword is, and using that just to sort of determine whether or not you're going to hit a sword or hit the body. Like you wouldn't be doing anything like against pure geometry, I don't think, at this time. Not for something like that. But it is a difference from other games of the time, and even much later, where it was more common to have hit frames. Like you're going to actually hit during these few frames if some conditions are met, right? If the shield is down or what have you. So, which was much more of a just pure, some annotations in the animation data that would tell you that, and fighting games actually often still use this. So it's a perfectly valid way of doing things. I've never made a fighting game, but I have read a fair amount about hitboxes and when they're active and all that stuff. And that's basically what you're doing, is saying when is it okay to hit, when do things get through and when don't they, and all of that stuff. And it's not really a sort of pure geometry consideration. So I could see sort of a mix of those things going on, like definitely taking into account, like the sword is basically probably always active, but how fast it's moving probably determines how much damage it's going to do and things like that. So they probably just know. They probably tag the animations a little bit with this is how much damage you would do here and things like that. But knowing their ethos, I could sort of believe that they simulated it because they simulate everything.
Yeah, I feel like it. Like for instance, I'm pretty sure the blood effects are not. It's not like a per pixel situation, but it happens on the enemy when you hit them very close to where the sword is making contact. And you basically have 3 locations: left, right, or top. And then to your point about tagging the animations, when you do the sort of like wind up, that you have to commit more time to, and then your hand goes straight up and off camera, and then it comes down on their head or whatever. They definitely are, obviously they would probably tag that to do more damage because you've committed to it and stuff. So anyway, because I avoided it, I just wanted to mention that there's actually a little more going on there than I thought. I didn't get a chance to, and I probably never will get a chance to, but it'd be interesting to see if anyone has done a non-stealth aggression playthrough of this game, like in a speedrunner-y kind of way. Because I bet once you get good at the sword and the tells, because the enemies do have tells and they have a little bit of pattern recognition, you might be able to master the sword play in the game. And if you did, I'm thinking it actually would be a pretty darn easy game, because you can just take everyone
challenge
out one at a time. Yeah, you can't take on numbers because that's when I'm reloading, is when
there's 3 guys,
because they definitely, what they tend to do is run away, get more of them, and then basically a train happens, a la EverQuest, where it's just like a train of them are just running at you and down a corridor, and there's nothing you can do. But if you take them on one at a time and you know what you're doing, I bet you could clear the game. Every level probably would be like 10 minutes, so it's interesting, just weird. I like playing on, like I've said before, I like playing on the podcast because I just feel this freedom to just experiment, where as a player I never do that. So
that's interesting. I haven't been playing with the sword very much. I did, I can't remember I was streaming the first few levels on Sunday, and there were definitely times when I just was it was all in the guild, I guess, because there was a point at which I was so frustrated, and I just started killing the guards, which I would never have done. But it was like, well, I want to go through that room. I don't want to spend a ton of time trying to time it. They've seen me. They know I'm around. I'm just going to shoot them with arrows through the window until they're dead, so that I can progress and maybe get this thing over, because that level took me forever, which we'll talk about. Yeah. So, but for the most part, other than that, I have been playing sort of the way I would normally play this game, which is a lot of waiting to have a guy come right up to where you want him to be, so you can step right out and bonk him on the head. So
yeah, and to be clear, overall, that's still. The thing I wanted to mention with the blackjack is overall that's generally still how I'm playing. I just am not reloading when I get into trouble, and so I'm interacting with the sword simulation more so. But the reason, the quick point I wanted to make on the blackjack, the reason for that I think is interesting is, I can't think of another alternative, but the blackjack being the non-lethal approach, other than the waiting part that you mentioned, the blackjack actually is the most efficient way to play the game, in my opinion, because sword and arrows take more than you want them to take somebody down.
Yeah, they take a long time often.
Yeah, you can get some lucky shots occasionally. I think if you shoot them with an arrow in the back of the head, I think it does a lot, and you can sometimes take them down in one shot, but it's really hard to do. And I just think it's an interesting choice that probably was very intentional, that the most efficient way to play was a non-lethal approach. When a lot of games in this genre, if you will, started to embrace action more and more, especially the Hitmans of the world and stuff. And so, you could run and gun a little bit more easily than you ever could. And I think you lose some of the identity that way. But I'm using the blackjack just because ultimately I feel like it's just quicker.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think part of that is the Leon, the professional fantasy, which was a few years before this game, of just being so good you can get right up behind a guy, and put your knife to his throat. That's how good you can be. And I think that really pays off on the fantasy of stealth, right? Is I'm so stealthy, I can walk up right behind you and pick your pocket and then bonk you on the head. So
totally,
it's I think it really pays off on that. The other two mechanics that show up here in this section are, I think the first trap is in the boneyard. And then the lock picking occurs after that. I guess assassins, I think, might be where you pick. Yeah, it's got to be where you pick up the that's sort of part of your payment, is like, oh, now I have enough to get a good set of lock picks. Which doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but it doesn't dwell on it. It just kind of slides on by. Like, why wouldn't he have lock picks already? I mean, he seems like he's pretty good at his job, but maybe it's just hard to keep your head above water. They don't spend a lot of time on sort of what is the world like and your upkeep and things like that, like how much money you have to spend on everything, which is good. Like I don't necessarily need that, but there's a lot of things that sort of slide by and are not explained. The lockpicks don't seem like they're a couple of pieces of metal. They're not super complicated, but I don't know. If you think about it too much, I'm not sure that holds up. But yeah, I mean, we add on there's traps of different kinds, and there are the traps. I recall there are some arrow traps, and then there is a sort of mystical trap that has to do with, I guess it shoots a flying skull at you or something like that. And then in the sword level, the final level we played this time, there's also some clearly magical traps. One thing I did think about as far as those things went is that all the projectiles move fairly slowly. And you'll remember that talking with Ken Levine about System Shock 2, him talking about, well, we had things that move a little slower and all this stuff because of engine constraints. It's really built around that, this engine.
Yeah. The thing I think it's interesting that by happenstance we played Tomb Raider and Thief back to back, because it's interesting to contrast the trap design, because for the most part there's a couple instances in the sword level that they break this rule, I believe, because they're triggered by opening a door, but most of the time if you stop and are observant, you can see where the trigger is and where the receptacle of the where it's going to come from, where it's going to come from. And so I really love that they committed to that, and kind of from a kind of a utilitarian sort of like mechanized way, like how all the mechanisms work. And so if you aren't patient and observant, then you'll probably trigger traps. But a lot of the time, if you look on the ground, you can see the plate. If you walk around it, you're fine. If you look on the wall, you can see the hole, and there's like in Constantine's mansion, there's like a face on the wall and the hole's coming out of the mouth or something. So It's really cool to kind of like, once you realize that, to kind of really look around and see, what's going on. Like I said, with the exception of a couple, I think, doors that trigger when you open, so you wouldn't, like, that's what Tomb Raider was doing, where they would kind of teach you by trial and error and then punish you by killing you or something. And most of the time you're not killed with these traps, so that's good at least. But I thought that was a cool kind of like more real way to implement traps in this kind of game. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had a moment in I guess it was the Boneyard or Bone Horde, where I'd gone to this room. There's like a checkerboard pattern on the floor of all these pressure plates, and I was like, "Oh, good, I'll get around those." And then I went into the area where the treasure actually was, and I'm like, "I wonder where this one comes from." And I stepped on it and got shot because I hadn't figured it out, and I thought I understood where it was going to come from. And the person who designed the trap, I guess, had outwitted me. And that was a good moment, just of like, oh, of course, I should have seen that. I should have noticed. And it sort of teaches you as well. So that was kind of cool. It teaches you that be careful, pay attention. A lot of the lessons that a Dark Souls game teaches you today is, be thoughtful, be paying attention, know what's going on. And it definitely pays off on that, and makes you feel like you've got some player skill as well, which is really just reading the environment, but that's a good skill.
Yeah, so it makes you feel smart. Yeah. I think my favorite one is in the Bone Horde, that plays like they teach you about plates and stepping on plates up to that point, and then they kind of switcheroo on you, because there's that one, I don't even think it's Critical Path, I think it's just like a side treasure you can get, where there's light coming from the ceiling in the form of a cross on the ground. And if you step into the light, then it triggers it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't think I triggered that one.
You can just like, skirt your way around it. And so I came into it and I'm like, oh, this is a neat room. Look at that cross on the floor and all this stuff. And I was like, wait a second. I've seen Indiana Jones, and you're like, and then so you kind of go around the light, and then I kind of intentionally stepped into the light to see what would happen, and, saw where the holes were and stuff. And sure enough, the light was triggering it. And so, it was just, cool little level designer tricks there that were neat.
The other one that comes in is the lock picking, which this is one of my favorites. I mean, there were people who were watching me play who prefer mini games, but as we talked about in, I think it was the Metal Gear Solid discussion, I really like things that are real time, where the game is not paused, which is funny because in this game, if you read anything, the game does become paused. So it's kind of, they're not fully committed. So maybe it was Deus Ex, actually. Now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway. I think it might have been both. Yeah. Yeah, maybe both. But I love the fact that the clock doesn't stop, that you're just in the world, you're still in first person. They're fully committed to that. And that's the commitment they're making rather than to the real time, I guess. But you have to move in closer. Like a door that's unlocked or that you have the key from, you can be a greater distance from to unlock it. But if you have to use the lockpicks, you have to get up nice and close. And you have to guess. They have keys bound to the 2 lockpicks. Now beyond that, it's a pretty simple lockpick. It's pick the one, do it as quickly as you can. You don't even have to jiggle the key or anything. It's just going to happen. It's just an animation. But I there's something there that I really enjoy.
Yeah. The two things, I forget. Yeah, I'm trying to think of. I guess it must have been the Rumble must have been on a different sequel or something. But the audio for it is very successful. I think it really gives you a sense that Garrett is really doing his thing, And the other interesting thing, which was probably unintentional, is because maybe they did want to do more with it, not in necessarily a minigame way, but it's pretty simple. Maybe not, though. Maybe it was intentional. That you kind of get a sense that, yes, you're playing as Garrett, but he has some lockpicking skills that you as a player don't have. So you're just sort of triggering it, and you get this sense that he's doing all the work, like he's doing something. I hear the sounds, and it's like the handle is jiggling, and he's just working hard, and I get to do the easy part. So it's kind of like it makes him feel cool because, he's doing some sort of magic with the lockpick. So that's at least my headcanon for it. But yeah, I think the audio for me is the key. It just sounds like the business is happening, in a cool way. Yeah. And I love that. However, to people's points on your stream with minigames and stuff, though I am not going to vote for Pipe Dreams minigames or anything like that, I will say that it also makes me want some sort of minigame. Not necessarily minigame per se, but I believe in the third Thief game. I think it's the third, which I did one GDC year. I did a 20-minute talk in a set with 2 other developers.
I went to that too.
Remember that one?
Yeah, we were there together.
Okay, yeah, okay, you were there. I don't remember anyway. And I did mine, but then Kent Hudson, I believe, he did one on the lockpicking mechanics that they put into the third Thief game, because he worked on that. I believe that's what he was talking about. And it was just you kind of got to see the tumbler from like a cross-section view, I think, and it was sort of like you saw the metal going in there and kind of like flicking each of the tumbler rods and all this kind of stuff. And when I'm doing it in this game, I kind of like want a little bit more in detail of what's going on there.
Sure,
but it definitely is a cool, like, just separate from that, the fantasy fulfillment of being a thief. It just really nails it.
Well, the thing that happens, and this will tie in, I guess, into the audio, and we can go to that next, is that because you're doing that, you're actually making noise at the same time, and you're probably visible. But if you're opening a door that has a guard on the other side, you're also making noise that they can hear from the other side. And because the audio is a impulse that they kind of put out into the world, that is sort of pay attention to me if you're in range, regardless of what it is. You have that moment of whenever you do it, you're balancing all these different sorts of things. And I think the problem with a mini game there is that, well, now you're on a different screen. Probably it's very hard to do something like that in first person. So the fact that it's audio, that the audio is still in this other world that you've just kind of departed from, I think that's a hard problem to solve. And I would rather have the simulation impulses happen than be pulled away and have it.
Yeah. It definitely. So I totally see what you mean, and it's definitely a double-edged sword for sure. And I'm not saying it's necessary every time. I feel like I just want a little bit more. I don't remember per se, and I won't be able to look it up here, but I think in the third one, the lockpick was like a picture-in-picture kind of thing. So I don't think you left the screen. I think you were still kind of looking at the door, and then you got to see this like picture-in-picture cutaway. So you still had some of that tension, you know what I mean? Where you're standing there, and it's just you get to see what the lockpick is doing inside the lock at the same time. But I could be wrong on that. That was my memory. So I'm wondering if they had dissected that.
Played enough of that game to actually remember.
And then, by the way, this for those who
you're right. Yeah, I just looked it up. There's a little sort of HUD element that shows up in the bottom right, and you actually still see him manipulating the thing. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's tough. It does mean you have to lock in because they kind of push you in. They kind of animate you into position.
It's a commitment. Yeah, it's a different thing.
Yeah, it's a different thing. And that's not where animation was at the time. No. So wouldn't have worked, but it's a good extension to it for sure. As long as you can keep that. Yeah.
In this game, though, it is a great solution for that. That's something that we had never seen before. And again, you think about it from a D&D context, and thieves are always picking locks, and that's just a fantasy that you really want. And usually, it was just like in a Bard's Tale or something like that. It was just a text string that said you pick the lock. That's as much as you got. And here, at least, you get. And to your point about the time tension, like the harder locks where you're using both picks and both of them take a while to do. The tension is really ratcheting up because there's probably a guard on his way,
right?
And you're like,
can hear him, and can I get it done?
Finish it.
Yeah.
And so that's great tension and you're not worried about a mini game when you're doing it. You're really just worried about the tension of like basically a timer bar, going down. That's
exactly. Yeah,
a very contextualized bar of ticking clock. But yeah, it's interesting. And you can see why from this game in particular, from sort of it's what it influenced how all the various lock picking, experiences blossomed off of this, and people went into mini game directions, people went into other directions, it's sort of like, it's a funny thing. I mean, I guess.
I mean, it's not to say that I don't like a lockpicking mini game. It's just it feels like a separate thing in games I've worked on in Skyrim or Fallout. It's just a different thing, and but you're not trying to pay off on the experience there that you're a thief. It's more, this is just a skill you have, and this is how you use the skill. We want you to be able to do something while you're doing it. So there are a lot of different goals there. And here it's definitely, let's stay in the first person all the time and make all the audio matter and make time matter and all this stuff. So it's all about the choices. So it's not that I always hate a mini game. It's more, in this game, I like it the way it is. So
got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think we ought to turn to the levels now. We had a couple other topics to get to, but I think we'll have to push them the next time.
That's a good idea.
So the first we've sort of touched on a little bit is the Bone Horde. You said you had something specific about that one to bring up.
The one thing I just wanted to mention from a level design perspective that I made a note of that probably intentional, and I really respect if it was intentional, is when you start early in that game and you're down in the catacombs, the previous levels really gave you a sense of being it's a term that they sort of started using with the Arkham games and Splinter Cell and stuff like that. But that sort of sense of being a predator, that you're really you're the one in charge of a given situation and level, and everyone else is sort of like at your, even though it's lethal and you can easily die if you mess up, you still kind of are the master of your domain. And especially in the manor, the first level, the first real level, you're just kind of, you're going through and doing what you're going into the rooms you want to go into, and then and generally things are a little bit open and give you a lot of options, and you're kind of the master of your domain. And early in the Bone Horde, the hallways are very constricted and close in and claustrophobic, until you get into some of sort of the superstructure of the not mortuary, but lost the word, just where all the bodies are buried and stuff. And
the crypts or whatever. Yeah.
The crypts. Yeah. That's the word I was looking for. But I really it was interesting to go from a contrast where most of the experiences up to this point, you kind of could go wherever you wanted to, but early in that level, you're really pushed through these narrow hallways, And as a thief, you have very few options. You're just kind of going, not necessarily fully linear, but kind of linearly, and you feel claustrophobic, because your options are taken away from you. Mm-hmm. And it's a nice contrast, I felt, and it wasn't for very long part of the level, but just to start off that way where you kind of go into there's that sort of like, I think you go through water first, right? And then you come up into the crypt and then you're in these narrow hallways every now and then. And it just feels like a very different game because they're taking all your options away from you.
Right.
And you can't really just kind of like, you can't go and necessarily hide exactly where you want to because you have to move forward into this narrow hallway. And, the zombies are kind of whatever, you can just run. I don't ever, deal with them.
No, I run around them as well. Although I did take one on long enough. I didn't remember how they worked. And so when I started out the level, yes, I was starting out the level. Yeah. There's one that's right there and it kind of gets up and it comes after you and you can kill it with a sword, but then it'll get up again and you can kill it again and it'll get up again. So I think it gets up 3 times. And then the funny thing was that once I had put it down, apparently for good, its head animated and it was just following me, the head, not moving, but just on the neck.
Come on.
It was facing me as I was getting close to the body. Yeah, it was really great. It was hilarious.
Wait, it wasn't like following you around like on a path.
No. I mean, it was attached to the body, but as I moved around the body, the head would turn.
I don't think I've ever killed. I can't think if I've ever killed a zombie. Well, I mean, you can use holy water.
If you use holy water, that destroys them. So this was more like just beating them up enough. I was just curious. I'd never done that. I didn't rememr. I had used the holy water, but not that. This time I mostly just ran by them because they're not really a huge threat. They are kind of a weird addition. That's something we'll get to later. But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. The one memorable thing, because I want to get to assassins for sure. We have to talk about a lot of stuff with the levels, but the one last thing I'll mention on Bone Horde that I always really liked and forgot about until playing this time, the ending when you get the horn itself, and you're in that section of the family crypt or whatever, and it has a musical name, right? I forget what it's called, but it's like the singing chambers or something.
Right. Yeah.
And the audio is so awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, just really like good. The tonal like echoes that are happening. And then what you realize as you're getting closer and closer to the horn and you go up and up and up is the horn is making the sound or it's at least that's your perception. And it's just such a great audio cue and it gets louder and louder as you get closer and closer to the horn. And it's just very memorable moment. I feel like every level in this game has some memorable moment like that where they really, finally crafted it. So that was cool.
Yeah, no, I like that too. I actually made a note of that as well. And it's kind of mournful and low because it's not not a bunch of them. Oh, it's a really good bit of audio.
Yeah. But Assassins, to move on, is one of my I think I maybe even alluded to this in previous episode of some kind on the podcast, but this is one of my favorite levels like of all time. Because of the way it starts and your intro was joking with, and this concept of tracking, which, essentially became a big part of Assassin's Creed as well, right? Of like listening in and following people and
blending into the crowd and all that stuff. Yeah.
It's just so brilliant. And I couldn't believe I was doing it at the time. And then there's this sort of payoff because then you get to find out who it was who ordered your assassination. And then you get to, kind of get revenge on them. And get into their house, and I don't know. It's just such a great.
I also love that this is a guy that Garrett knows. Oh, Ramirez, right? He means when you finally get there, he's like, I'm going to make him pay for deciding to do this to me. And that's pretty great. Even though you're like, who the heck is Ramirez? That doesn't mean anything to me.
That's the rich history.
It's Garrett,
yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, it's kind of terrific, and he's got the big house with the big R on the front of it, and in the end, of course, you're going to find him and actually take his purse right off of him. So it makes it really personal, and that's pretty difficult to do without being seen. So, I mean, not that I pickpocketed him. I got up behind him and whacked him on the head, but yeah. But even just getting up behind him and knocking him out is tricky because his pattern is a little erratic, and he's edgy. It sort of reminds me of the Leon the Professional moment at the sort of beginning of the movie where the guy is like panicked. All my guards have been taken down. Oh my God, where's he going to come from? And he's backing up, and then he's right behind him, and that's sort of the moment that you have here. I definitely feel like that's a clear influence on this game. It's only a handful of years, I think, before this game, so definitely a thing. But and you get a really good use of that dynamic goals because you think the mission's about something entirely different as well. So they're using all the sort of tech that they've built, and it's not complicated to do that, but it's still a thing you got to do, and they're using it really, really well. It's kind of a low implementation cost technically, with a really high dramatic payoff. So I also really love it.
Mm-hmm. But then we get to Thieves Guild,
which I would say I love a lot less.
And then this is a new level for both of us because
we've never played gold.
Never played the gold edition, and we were debating in pre-show whether it was cut or whether it was made as kind of like a DLC for the gold edition. I think we kind of landed that it was probably new
added on.
Because it felt like sort of like a circus of thief. Circus of thief actions, just different experiences. I felt like sort of almost like a best of. Like if you had played Thief the Dark Project originally, and then you go and you're like, oh, I'm going to play the gold version, and then you play this, you're like, because they kind of have a little bit of everything peppered in. It's extremely too long and complicated.
Yeah,
you're dealing with two different kind of villains. And you have to go to one to get the key to go to the other, the engine just does not support. Just pure amount of memory that systems would have had. They just couldn't do enough variation in things like textures to be able to tell where you are at any given point. And the map's not good at that.
And the map's useless because it's very difficult to tell up, down. And when you're going page to page, it's like, how do these connect? It's a little hard to even tell that. I was lost. The amount of time I spent, it became comic. There was a point at which I said, man, I'm really hungry. I'm going to have to stop soon. And I don't think I finished for another hour and a half after that. Because I was like, well, I'm almost done. I'll just keep going. I'll just kind of power through. And it just kept going. And I think the fundamental issue is it's very unfocused. If it had been part of the original storyline, I would have been like, this is the one to cut because it's not, it doesn't aid the game in any way.
No. And there's also, there's an early moment that they don't pay off on. I think that we'll talk about this probably next time, but the incidental dialogue that you hear from enemies when you're eavesdropping on them is generally great most of the time, especially the specifically scripted written ones. The bear pit in the first level, the bear pit conversation, I think I will never forget it because it's the first big one you hear. Just such a great conversation that those guards have in the front of the manor. But in the beginning of this level, you hear the two thieves talking, and there's password and all this stuff. And I'm like, cool, I'm going to get to use the password.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like knocking on the door and like, there's nobody, and so it felt like a missed opportunity, where they set up this concept of a thief sneaking into thieves guilds. Yeah. And it's just ends up being a long set of corridors and sewers and prisons and manners, and it's literally just
devices to open different doors. And it just does not.
Oh, that's right.
There was a secret door at some point that I had missed.
There's
at least two secret doors. There was probably two secret doors.
Each thief each guild has, or each side of the guild has their own secret door.
And there was the worst part was I had at a certain point I was trying to actually get into the last, or I guess get into the building that I needed the key for the safe. Also, you need to use the sword to cut down the banners, which was not a thing. I realized.
That's right.
Thank goodness for the chat, because I would have been I had no idea. But I had gotten up there and I was like, "Oh, there's a safe. Great. Let me pick the lock." Oh, can't pick the lock. Have to have the key. I went. And,
oh no! So you went there first?
Yes.
Oh shoot!
Yeah, I was lost. I was so lost, and I just kept saying, "Oh my god, this is awful. This is horrible. I can't believe it." I mean, I was miserable at that point.
I must have gotten lucky because I got the key first.
Well, I missed the secret door or one of the secret doors, and I ended up retracing the whole level. And there was a point at which I tried to open a door. And I checked the keys that I had, and at some point I had auto picked up a key. It was like in a chest.
Yeah.
And so I didn't even know I had it. And so I went hunting around the levels again, because I thought I had missed it, and it turned out I actually had it in my inventory already. And then I was trying to find my way back to that door. Oh, it was it was not great.
That pickup interface stuff is really bad. Every time I open a chest, I go to my inventory to make sure I didn't get a new key or not. Yeah.
Well, apparently there's a setting to be able to set it so that when you open your inventory again, it will open on whatever's new.
Okay.
That's what I was told in chat, but I did not go and hunt down that option.
Yeah, I haven't found that. Yeah. Yeah, and I was pretty frustrated at the end too, and literally the tapestry stuff. I didn't even think to swipe it until after, with the sword, and so I literally was doing the ye old, run along the wall, hitting the interact button.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I was hearing the noises. I'm like, there's something here, and I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. And then I had the keys already, so I unlocked and got the treasure that way. And then I was like, oh, wait a second. Then I could swipe these, and then swiped them, and then you can reveal. Yeah. So it was a cool moment when I found it, but it was frustrating and not taught to me at all. So the truth of the matter is probably there's other, like if you're trying to get 100% of the treasure, I bet in previous levels, like the manor or something, I wonder if there's tapestries there that you could have,
I don't know, because the Thief Gold engine is actually the Thief 2 engine for the most part.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I think there are some differences, and I think that might be one, because I started doing that more, like in the sword, which we'll turn to now. There were a number of places where I was like, oh, and there's this place where these two guards, and there's like 3 banners hanging behind them. And I'm like, I'm going to be able to find the sword behind this, right? Because I hadn't looked up and seen it above me. And I didn't remember. But that was for naught. I think that only the new levels might have that. And I think that might be a Thief 2 edition. Although I certainly don't remember it. Having played Thief 2, but maybe hard to say.
Yeah, I'm looking at one site that shows the difference between the each level for the original and gold, because some levels they did change.
They added enemies.
They did difficulty changes, or like in this case, in the Bone Horde, they actually changed certain surfaces to wood in the gold edition, so you could use rope arrows. Where that wasn't the case. But anyway, speaking of which, let's talk about the sword.
Yeah.
How'd you get inside the house?
I used the rope arrow, got up to that balcony, and then went along the ledge to go in the window and go down the ladder to the first floor.
Yeah.
Which I love.
It's cool.
I'm a second story guy is like, the thief analogy there. It's a beautiful bit of wish fulfillment of, I got up to the second story. It was easier to get in that way,
Yeah. If you put 2 and 2 together and you look up and you see that wood and you're like, I'm going up, and you just feel so badass.
Yeah.
It's just amazing moment. And that's like distilled down this game for me, of just like that. And rope arrows specifically are a great example of We talked about this with System Shock and Deus Ex as well, but just like the concept of rules-based, a rules-based world like that, where wood surface means something very important and specific, and you have a tool like a rope arrow, and then you just start being creative with it. And I know there's a bunch of interesting videos out there about people using rope arrows in fun ways.
Oh, I'm sure, because it is the sort of thing that can be abused or whatever, because you can also use it if you could jump across further spaces, because you can jump out to the rope arrow and then jump across. Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is you can climb up a rope arrow and remove the arrow while you're on the rope.
Yep.
Yeah, and drop down and stuff. So it's like, very interesting.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So you're in. Yeah, this level is fun just because it's the Winchester Mystery House of right.
Well, and the modern analogy that I alluded to earlier is that in Dishonored 2, there is a mansion called the Clockwork Mansion.
I haven't played that game yet, but I've played one. But
it's not as far gone as this, where there's stuff in here that you're like, that's physically impossible. There's water that's has no support and things like that. There's a number of things that make no sense whatsoever.
There's the astral planes room.
Right?
Did you go there where you're in space?
Oh no, that might be the little big room that we've heard about. Yeah, I haven't. I did not find that, but yeah,
you come out onto a ledge and you're basically in the sky, like in outer space, and there's just these kind of floating. It's an optical illusion kind of thing, but there's, floating platforms and you jump onto them. There's a piece of gold there. And then you kind of go into this, it's sort of like the level that I made for Indy, where it's sort of like you're going into this weird negative space that shouldn't be possible, but the engine's allowing them to do it. It's very, anyway.
I do love that sort of stuff. This one, this is when, I want to say I was all in on Thief when it was basically from Assassins. That was when I was like, oh, this game is doing some really interesting things. But this is where I started to think, okay, this fiction might actually be for me, because this is a space. And I've mentioned this before on the cast. I like when video games do things that are not physically possible. I'm good with that. To me, that's totally valid. And in fact, you see less of it today because we use physics engines and things like that. And it's much harder to make them behave in these weird ways than when you used to code all your physics yourself. So doing things like this where the world is twisted and there's things that make no sense whatsoever, but we're going to make it happen, is a whole thing that I just totally love. And it's something that you did in that final level of the Indiana Jones game, Infernal Machine, where you're going into the Ethereum, and it makes no sense that you could turn around and go this way, and now there's some extra dimensional space or whatever. But I just love that stuff, and it's something I wish games did more of, because it's a way of kind of pulling us out of our normal perceptual loop, right? It's a thing that makes our brains go, hey, wait a minute, that shouldn't work. And I love those moments. That's just the thing I really enjoy. So it's a
memorable level, and I had some loose memory about sort of where some of the things were. And so I felt very clever kind of getting to the top floor, kind of finding, the way to get back up to it. And then kind of the getting into the garden area. And then I kind of got to the sword fairly quickly, actually, and kind of avoiding the guards, and got the sword and kind of got out and felt very, very much that sneaking through the clockwork of it all. It's just such and then trying to get out, which was definitely a gong show, but it's just it's a very memorable. And the other thing that is a bit of a spoiler for the next cast, because I did end up watching the cinematic after.
Yeah,
this.
I did too. Yeah.
To
save at the beginning of the next level.
Yeah, exactly. Same exact reason. But you're kind of introduced by the woman that has hired you for this, to this concept of this character Constantine, and you're like, oh yeah, we were going to steal from this guy, and then you get to meet him afterwards, right? And the interesting thing that I hope was very intentional is you get a sense of his character from playing this level.
Yeah.
Because he's crazy.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So it's like,
clearly.
And he's weird and like creepy, and you're like, wow, yeah, I just went through your house and you're messed up.
Yeah.
And now you want me to do
all these trees in the middle of your house. What is going on?
Yeah. So it's like all the foreshadowing is like just dripping off of everything that's happening. And then, so it's like character through level design, is kind of an interesting concept to me. And it's like, well, yeah, this is his house. And so you can tell a lot about a person by their house, right?
Yeah.
In real life. So I think it's just a cool, and I can't wait to finally at some point someday play Dishonored 2, because I finally finished one a while ago, but they've even in one they've carried a lot of that forward.
Yeah, for sure.
That mentality. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the environment tells so much of the story of the characters. Sort of for each big bad's individual level, you get to understand a lot about those characters from how they live. And yeah, you're totally right. This was definitely one of those like, whoa, you can do that in a video game moments for me. That I've always loved, and here it definitely pays off for me as well for all those same reasons, and it will tie in, of course, to the stuff as goes on, and you're getting a sense of how it might because of that final cutscene where they're giving you this hint that there's something going on here, because you're basically getting the Stephen King Creep Show short. I don't know if you saw that movie, but where Stephen King plays a country bumpkin, and some meteorite falls, and little tendrils of greenery are coming out of everything after that. And
Oh yeah, that's a good reference. That's definitely gotta be an influence.
I would say so. I mean, I'm actually I just saw it on the big screen just recently, like 6 weeks ago.
Nice.
So,
yeah, it's kind of that creepiness of that's kind of Swamp Thing meets Cthulhu, kind of like H.P. Lovecraft kind of weirdness of what's out there in nature that is yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah, again, we'll get into where all this goes as we keep going, but. All right. It's good set of levels, some pretty memorable stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I love this stuff. All right, let's roll right into feedback because it's getting long, and I think we're just going to do the 3. I gave you 2, and I have 1. We have a couple others here, but I think that's what we'll do this time because they have questions for the most part. So it's good to try to tackle them. Actually, maybe we'll just do 2. Let's do 2, 1 each. First of all, you can send us reviews. We haven't had a review in a while. We'd sure like to have some. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, and that helps us reach new listeners, at least through the Apple ecosystem, as it were. And those who send us feedback, send it to devgameclub@gmail.com, where this first one from Gothic Chocobo, who we heard from last time, we have one from him. So go ahead.
Subject is shock and promotions. I'm sorry, I said that in a question, and he didn't write it in a question. Shock and promotions. Gothic Chocobo. Hey, Brett and Tim. I saw this advert promotion for Lara Croft promo.
Lucozade. It's like Gatorade, I think.
Oh, okay, Lucozade. I don't know that.
I think it's
this morning, and it got me thinking about some of the bizarre adverts and promotional stuff the video game industry used to do for games. What was the best, worst, most bizarre advert and promotional things that you can remember video games doing? Keep up the good work. Yeah, I couldn't open the image that you sent me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a side of a bus.
Client
okay. So it's a side of a bus, and the Lucozade has been changed to Larazade, limited edition, with her on the. And I actually think, it's not really clear, but I don't know if it's if it was a game tie-in or a movie tie-in. Yeah, I couldn't think of any in particular, but I did think of one that we did for a game I worked on, which was Fallout 3, which, as you know, was set in the DC area, which is where I currently live. Partly why they chose that area, not because I live here, but because Bethesda is here.
Yeah,
and no, they chose it based on me. So a couple of things. One, there's all this art of a destroyed Washington D.C., like the Capitol building with a huge chunk taken out of the dome. In particular, was a big one. And they plastered that up on like bus stops everywhere in DC. And there were TV stations doing news reporting on what's going on, and not necessarily the greatest choice considering.
Was it not? Maybe.
Well, but it's only local. I don't really think that was national news. But we did also take over an entire metro station for like a week. Vault Boy was everywhere, and those images were everywhere. So if you went to Metro Center, which is one of the biggest stations in all four lines pass through it in DC, if you went there on that week, it was an assault on the senses. It was on the ground, it was on the walls, it was on the sides of the train. I mean, it was just nuts how much Vault Boy was there. And considering that we destroyed Washington, I mean, everything was destroyed in the game, I guess, in the universe. But it was quite a thing. Certainly there have been any number of tchotchkes over the years too, stuff that was sent to reviewers that you just kind of shake your head at, like, what were they getting at with that? But I can't remember it.
There was one. The only one I can remember that was more, it was a promotional thing, like Brett said, that was sent, I think, with early review copies or something like that. I think it was either Rage or Bulletstorm. I think it was Bulletstorm because I think EA Partners published that with Epic / People Can Fly. I think they sent pieces of meat to to reviewers, like raw steak, to them for some reason. And I think Jeff Gerstmann and some of the Giant Bomb folks still talk about that today. I think it was Bulletstorm.
You're right. It was
I might have that wrong.
No, it was Bulletstorm. Yeah.
And I don't remember what I think. That game was trying to be provocative in all sorts of ways, and and in its language and all that kind of stuff. So I think it was sort of. I don't know if they had like a catchphrase that came with the meat or something like. I don't know. I don't even want to try to make one up, but anyway, that one was always weird.
It was labeled. I'm looking at the image now. It was labeled Combo Afterburner 99% Ground Grade A Final Echo Squadron. So it was like something in the game. There's a dog tag in the bag with the meat. So yeah, a whole weird thing. And there's a sticker on the end that says "Do not consume, could cause serious injury."
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. The other one that I was thinking of, and this I had forgotten, was naming your baby Turok. For one of the Turok games. I don't remember. I never played any Turok games, but I do remember, and that would have been since I've been in the industry for sure. So that was definitely a thing where you're like, what?
Yeah.
Name your baby.
And somebody did it.
Yeah, and somebody did do it. Yeah. There's always somebody who's gonna do that.
Yeah, there's so many funny ones. Yeah, not funny, and some of them are not so funny, but yeah, just weird ones. There was also a weird one with I don't know what this is a trend with EA, but Dante's Inferno had a weird one, as I recall, that was kind of distasteful. And then one weird one that I always remember was from Rockstar. I don't remember which GTA it was, but they sent brass knuckles, which are illegal in some states.
Oh yeah,
and that was a weird one. But on the positive side, one that I always remember being a really cool one was for Brutal Legend, Tim Schafer and Double Fine, they sent, because that was obviously heavily about music, and I don't know if anyone remembers the intro cinematic to that, the kind of opening credits was this FMV moment of Jack Black kind of flipping through.
Right, he was in like a record store or something like that.
Yeah. And it was his hands. It was kind of from like almost a first person view, and he was kind of flipping through things. They sent turntables to each of the reviewers, full turntables that work like kind of retro turntables with the record of the soundtrack that were unique, vinyls. With a record player, and it was kind of all branded and stuff, and came in this cool box. I don't know, that was one that I remember.
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah, I looked up the tagline for Dante's Inferno: "Sin to win."
Yeah. Yeah, and there was, I think, something they sent. It was something very sacrilegious or something.
Yeah, I was trying to get the images to enlarge so I could get a good look at them, but yeah, there was some poor choices there for sure. Yep, some interesting choices. All right, I'm going to move on to Bjorn Johansson. My experience with Thief. Hi, your old friend Bjorn here. I love stealth games. I've played and enjoyed every Splinter Cell game. That's one of the reasons I started playing Thief a couple of years ago. Playing the tutorial and first level, I could totally see myself getting into it, despite its difficulty and, by modern standards, unforgiving nature. But I completely bounced off with the introduction of the undead in Mission 2. I really enjoyed the start of an indie game called The Way, but again, I completely bounced off when they flipped the script and replaced the stealth exploration gameplay with horrible action and platforming. Bjorn's words. I haven't played that game. The game mechanics just didn't support the dexterity required for that sort of gameplay. Have you had similar experiences of initially liking games that then drag the rug out from under your feet? Love, Bjorn. Well, we love you too, Bjorn. You got any thoughts on that? I have one.
You should start. I know I have something, but I just think of anything right now.
For me, the game that really pulled the rug out from under me was Grand Theft Auto 4. I had not at that point played much of Grand Theft Auto 3, and I was like, well, I should, I had the most recent hardware at that point. I should really give the Grand Theft Auto series a try again. And so I got GTA 4. And I was playing it, and I'm like, oh, this is really intriguing story. We've got this immigrant story, and I don't know how he's going to get tied into crime and all this, but it's kind of, because of course that's the way it's going to have to go, the type of game it is. But I really was interested in sort of the story of this guy who's come to America to kind of leave his past behind. And then at the end of basically, I guess, the first act, and I don't really know because I stopped playing at this point, he finds some dude from, I guess, like Serbia or Eastern Europe or something like that, something in his history. And it turns out actually it's a revenge plot. And it totally changed the tone of the game entirely. And of course you have no choice in that sort of main story. And it was really upsetting to me because I thought it was such an interesting story to talk about this down on your luck immigrant story, having to do things that maybe are morally questionable, but just to get by. And I was totally in on that. I was so excited to play that. And then it turned into, oh, and here are the old members of my war unit or something that I did something horrible. I mean, who knows? And I just instant turn off, and I never returned to the game. I finished that and just was like, oh, this is not what I signed up for, and I don't want to play this. So that's the one that immediately came to mind for me.
Yeah, that's a good example. I've heard, I think you've told me that story before. I still can't, I'm looking through my Steam library. I can't think of anything. I know I've had them. That's the thing. It's a really good question, and I'll have to think about that. And maybe one will come to me, but yeah.
I mean, I
can't think of one.
I think there are sometimes games that in their particular adaptations maybe change a bit. Like I can remember playing The Sims on the PS2. which is a very constrained version of The Sims for obvious reasons. You had very limited memory, and so you couldn't just have all the stuff. It just had to be a different sort of game. But it became a game of concrete progression of, in this level you have to achieve these goals and get this big a house and buy this much stuff and have this many parties, or whatever. And that was another sort of turnoff. I probably played about half of that game and got to the point where the goals became just very, very difficult to achieve, and was just like, okay, I'm not having any fun. This is not Sims-like to me. It doesn't feel like the tool set that you get on the PC version. And it was sort of frustrating that way. And so that's another game I put down. I don't put down a lot of games, though. I tend to be a completist about everything. And so when I start games, I almost always finish them. And so that's probably a character flaw, to be honest, considering how much time I have for it. But anyway, but yeah, those are the couple things I could think of kind of off the top of my head there.
Yeah, good examples. Sorry, I can't think of one.
Yeah, it's all right. We know you don't play games.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I'm looking at my Steam library, and that's definitely
the truth. Yeah. Oh my God. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, we got one more from you, and we'll go ahead and. Actually, I think we said we were just going to do two.
Yeah, we can
almost an hour and a half already. So yeah, we'll call it there. So next time, I had said last week we would do 5 levels, and the reason is they start and end. The first one's in the cathedral, and the second one you return to the cathedral, and that's why they naturally bookend one another. So I think it's a good chunk. That's kind of a lot. I hope there are no guild because that one took me 3 hours.
Well, two of the levels in this section are new to gold.
Oh,
so be warned.
Okay. Well, we'll see how it goes. So those will take longer.
3, 4. So, wait. So are you saying including the cathedral? The return to the cathedral?
Yes,
because that would be 6.
Oh, are you sure?
Haunted Cathedral, Mage's Tower, Lost City, Songs of the Caverns, Undercover, and then Return to the Cathedral.
Oh, that's too many.
Is the list I'm looking at.
Oh, that's too many. Yeah, we can't do that many. Oh, that's too bad. That would have been a nice way to bookend it. But yeah, that's way too many levels.
Well, we could play up to Undercover then, which is
we'll play through
right
Undercover.
Before.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So Mage's Tower and Songs of the Caverns are the
new
two
ones. Yeah.
New ones. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I miscounted that last week. I could have sworn. Yeah, you're right, though. Yep. No, you're right.
Yeah, that's okay.
Double checking you, but yeah, they're totally right. Sorry about that. So that'll leave us. So it'll be 5 and 5 then, basically. 5 and 4. That'll be okay. Yeah, that'll be fine.
5 and 4. If I guess you're not counting the blooper reel. I don't know what that is.
I don't think that counts as a level. No.
Apparently, there's a blooper reel
added for
which I cannot wait to see what that is.
I look forward to checking that out.
It's a bonus mission set in the manor from the beginning.
That is, that's something we used to do at the time. That might be a topic we have to tackle. Remember the goofy stuff we added, especially to the Starfighter games. I don't know if we did it for Republic Commando.
Interesting. Yeah, I can't wait to play this.
Check that out.
Very interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the meantime, you can find the podcast on Twitter at DevGameClub. I monitor that. You can find Tim on Twitter at
Tim Longo Jr. with a J at the end.
Of course, you can find the podcast also on the web at devgameclub.com and shoot us mail at devgameclub@gmail.com. I try to reply to everything. I still have a couple that I have not gotten to that are super long, and I feel bad because it's just now it's like a mountain that I'm afraid to climb. But I'll get to you eventually, Second Quest. One of these days, I have to refresh myself on the games he's specifically talking about because it's been a while since we played them. But that's it for us this week. We'll see you next week, and good night.
Good night.